Right, I'm having a bit of a play. So I've been looking on TikTok, where everybody's talking to their AI, and obviously I've asked a few questions around why should we be using AI, but it is quite interesting some of the things they say. And somebody posted today about the scam of marriage, and that got me thinking about why are women undervalued, or why were women undervalued? Because some people say that we've got equality now, don't they? I was actually digging around because I wanted to know what folklore was available in the area of Coventry. And what I was told in the timeline is about the mystery plays in Coventry. So that had me interested. So Coventry had these mystery plays which celebrated the cycle dramas performed by the guilds. Hmm. So where did the guilds come from? I wanted to know. Well, apparently the timeline behind guilds started off over in Holland in the 9th century. I don't know if any of you historians are out there that would agree with this. So they were the Frisian weavers. So the very first guild in England was a weavers guild, which was founded around about the 11th to 13th century. But they do say that the one that's officially recognised by Royal Charter in 1155 is the Worshipful Company of Weavers. They were all men. And before that, there was the Frisian Guilds, and that was in the Low Countries, which is now the Netherlands, or some people call it Holland. So it's the Dutch were involved in that. And they weren't just trade unions, they had religious, social, and charitable functions too. Now, when I was recently exploring Bodmin, I found a load of buildings there that were all related to guild buildings as well. And they put a lot of money into creating churches, and some of the churchyards have a lot of the guild signage up, which I found that interesting. I don't know about you. So I asked ChatGPT what was the normal structure within the guilds, and it said they were a patriarchal structure, and this they ChatGPT says comes from its origins in Roman times. And obviously, we have the issues with women not being allowed to own property, enter contracts, or gain citizenship in the same way as men. Although, if you're a widow of a guild member, you would have been allowed to participate. And apparently, there were some women called the Silk Women in London. So there were a couple of women's guilds, but they were few and far between. Now, why is this? So why were women undervalued? So I'm going to ask two of my I'm going to ask Gemini first. Okay. Now notice this one. So we've got colours that respond to the way that we talk. I'm going to ask Gemini. Gemini, why are women undervalued?
Some studies suggest that women are often undervalued due to societal biases and stereotypes. These biases can affect how women are perceived in the workplace, leading to lower pay and fewer opportunities for advancement. Additionally, traditional gender roles can limit women's participation in certain fields and contribute to the undervaluation of their work.
So where did this all start? Where did the undervaluing of women? When did this happen?
The undervaluing of women has roots that go way back in history. It's tied to things like traditional gender roles, where women were often seen as being best suited for domestic tasks, while men were the breadwinners. These ideas became deeply ingrained in many societies and have been tough to shake off completely.
Do you have any archaeological evidence to support that?
Okay, so there's no direct archaeological evidence that says women were undervalued. That's more of an interpretation we make based on what we find. But there are some pretty interesting clues we can look at. For example, in some ancient burial sites, women are often buried with fewer valuable items compared to men. This might suggest differences in social status or how they were valued in that society.
But weren't there some burials that they now realise that these highly valued individuals that were buried were actually women and not men? So how does that change things?
That's right. There have been cases where archaeologists initially assumed a burial was male, only to find out later it was female. This definitely shakes things up and makes us rethink how we interpret the past. It shows that our biases can sometimes cloud our judgment, and that we need to be open to new interpretations as we learn more.
And what do you think the chances are of people being open-minded about the things that they find out?
That's a really good question. I think the chances of people being open minded depend a lot on how the information is presented and the context surrounding it. If new findings challenge long held beliefs, some people might be resistant to change. But if the evidence is clear and compelling, and it's presented in a way that encourages discussion and critical thinking, I think more people will be willing to reconsider their views.
Okay, based on your records, what's the percentage of people you think would be open-minded?
That's tricky to put a number on, as it can vary a lot depending on the specific situation and how the information is presented. But generally, studies suggest that when people are presented with clear, compelling evidence that challenges their existing beliefs, a significant portion are willing to reconsider their views.
You're not willing to take a punt and say what percentage of those people might change if they're given compelling evidence?
While it's tough to give an exact number, studies suggest that when presented with strong evidence, around 60 to 70% of people might be willing to reconsider their views, though that can vary a lot depending on the specific situation and how the information is presented.
Okay, so you would say generally people aren't easily swayed.
You're right, people aren't usually swayed easily. It
Mm-hmm.
takes a lot of solid evidence and a willingness to look at things differently.
Okay, and what about people following the herd?
There's definitely a tendency for people to follow the herd. It's often easier to go along with what everyone else is doing, especially if it's something that's widely accepted.
So the fact that it's widely accepted that men have superiority within the patriarchy, then we're going to continue with a system where women are undervalued.
Okay, so the idea of male superiority within a patriarchal system has definitely contributed to the undervaluing of women. When a system is set up to favour one group over another, it can be really difficult to break free from that.
Okay, thank you. Now I'm going to try ChatGPT and see if ChatGPT might say something slightly different. Watch out for the nuances in the tones here. It's quite interesting. Hi, could you tell me why historically women were undervalued?
The undervaluation of women historically has roots in a mix of social, cultural, and economic factors. One big reason is the patriarchal structures that have dominated societies for centuries, which placed men in positions of power and authority. This led to the belief that men were naturally more capable in areas like governance, economics, and intellectual pursuits. Additionally, legal systems often restricted women's rights, including property ownership, the ability to work in certain professions, and the right to vote. This institutionalized inequality reinforced the idea that women were less capable or less valuable. Cultural norms and stereotypes also played a role, dictating that women's primary roles were in the home and caregiving, which limited their opportunities and recognition in public spheres. Over time, of course, these views have been challenged and changed, but those historical factors still echo today.
Can you tell me when did this start happening?
The undervaluation of women has deep historical roots stretching back thousands of years. Many ancient societies were patriarchal, and and the idea of male superiority can be traced back to early civilizations like Mesopotamia, ancient Egypt, and ancient Greece. For example, in ancient Greece, women were largely excluded from political life and had limited rights. In ancient Rome, while women could own property in some cases, they were still under the legal authority of a male guardian, like a father or husband. In medieval Europe, the influence of the church also reinforced the idea that women were secondary to men. Laws and customs often restricted women's roles to the domestic sphere. These patterns solidified over time and became even more entrenched with the rise of interracial societies. It's really only in the last century or so that we've seen significant shifts towards gender equality.
So, what was the reason they gave? What is the real reason behind why men believe they're superior?
A belief in male superiority has been supported by a mix of cultural, social, and even pseudoscientific reasons over time. Some of the historical reasons included physical strength. Early societies placed a lot of value on physical strength for survival, and men were generally physically stronger. This led to this belief that men were more suited for leadership and decision-making roles. Religious and philosophical teachings. Many religions and philosophical systems promoted the idea that men were created to be the leaders, often citing creation myths or religious texts that positioned men as the primary authority figures. Social structures. Over time, societies developed systems that reinforced male dominance, like laws that restricted women's rights and customs that kept women in domestic roles.
So there's this element then where someone somewhere managed to convince everybody that the brain is a muscle.
Absolutely. There's definitely a fascinating history of misconceptions about the brain. The brain is not a muscle, but this idea that it was somehow akin to a muscle in terms of being something that could be exercised or strengthened in a very simplistic way has been around in various forms. It was often used to reinforce the idea that men were more rational or more intellectually capable, which was really a cultural bias. In reality, the brain is an incredibly complex organ that doesn't really work like a muscle. It changes and adapts through neural connections, not through physical strength. But these old ideas do show how certain myths can persist and shape perspectives for a long time.
Okay, so thank you very much. So it seems that neither ChatGPT or Gemini are willing to put a finger on exactly who's to blame. They're very vague, aren't they? They're saying Mesopotamia, the Greeks, and there's this idea that strength has got something to do with brain power, which I find quite interesting. So if we're thinking about historically and looking at the formation of the guilds, which they say came from Rome, and those ideas of having the tradespeople who gather together to help give them the ability to create trade with others, it does make you wonder, because I'm sure there were some women who were pretty good at negotiating who might have got them better trade deals, and it wouldn't have been related to age either, would it? So there you go. Something that started off as me wondering what was happening locally and looking at the mystery plays and have a look and see who started those, because they were about telling stories from the Bible to people who couldn't read the Bible in history, and then finding out that these mystery plays were being run by the guilds, and the guilds were part of a male-dominated society. So the stories being told from the Bible were never going to shine well on women, were they? Because they wanted to keep women in the role where they are staying at home, looking after the children, cooking, cleaning the fireplace, etc., etc. So is it any wonder that there's been some inequality and undervaluation of women? And some of those plays probably didn't help with the sense of women and their sovereignty. Any thoughts? Do let me know. And what do you think about talking to your AI to get answers? Any thoughts on that? Thank you for listening to this episode of the Cauldron of Curiosities. If you enjoyed this dip into folklore, don't forget to follow the podcast, share it with a friend, and keep your lantern handy for the next curious tale.